just going to do a really quick introduction, and then David is going to talk about singleness and the church, and I'm going to do the dating bit. Just incidentally, who's come for the dating bit? Put your hands up. Who's come for singleness, and who's come for both? So dating, both. Okay, good. Just getting an idea. Excellent. Right, it's useful to know that. So I've been running Christian Connection. Started it about 2000, and as we, obviously we've become a very big site, and lots of people have got married, and that's great, and lots of people have been to events and got to know each other. But I think at a certain point I began to realise that we had a real challenge of people who were single, who used the site, but had some concerns, and there was a lot of pain there. And so in about 2012, I had the bright idea of doing a survey. And it was 50 questions. I had no idea how to do a survey, and 3,000 people replied with lots and lots of information. So out of that, we developed this thing called Single Friendly Church. So that's where the two fit together. So David had the exciting task of, which he's very well qualified to do, to actually look at the survey, and from there has been doing a lot of work on singleness, the church, and the surrounding issues. So he's going to start. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm David. I'm going to talk about singleness. Now, some of you will instantly see that I'm wearing a marriage ring on my finger, and I've been single until 5 years ago, which is therefore much longer than most of you have been alive. I've been single. So I've had real ground experience of what it's like in this society and what it's like in the church. And it's interesting, at all sorts of levels. Even getting a mortgage. It was when I was young, if you were not married, it was considered very strange to want to have a mortgage when you're single. So there's all sorts of things that impact on you if you're single. Now, it's probably this biggest socio-demographic change that's going on at the moment in Great Britain. And in the census, 2011 census, the newspapers, when they started looking at the results, were absolutely full of, wow, we had no idea there were this number of single people who are neither married nor cohabiting, single people in our society. And that's what the main lead was, because they just simply underestimated what was happening up and down the land. And now 40% of adults are neither married, divorced, or either never married, divorced, or widowed, and not cohabiting. And under half the adults in this country, 47.6% if I remember, are actually married. So it's not what you sort of naturally think when you move around society. So why is this? The first thing is that people are marrying much later. The average date of first marriage is 30 plus or minus, depending on whether you're male or female. There's an acceptability. We live in a liberal democracy. And there's an acceptability of things like cohabiting, having children outside marriage, I'll come to that, and third, we live longer. In the United States, they reckon now an average adult spends more of their life as a single adult than they ever do either married or cohabiting. So it's a big change. Why does it matter? Well, it matters for all sorts of reasons. If you don't live in London, housing is a real problem for single people. It matters when an MP stands up in Parliament and says we can't meet our greenhouse gas emissions because of all these single people forcing us to have extra homes with extra heating, which he did. It matters when you try and go on holiday and you have to pay single supplements. Why? A couple with two salaries have far more disposable income. Single people, on average, have much fewer resources, much lower disposable income, actually, than married people, on average. It matters because if you're in London trying to get a mortgage, you wait, on average, a further 10 years over a married couple to raise the deposit to get a mortgage. That was a house building company that did that research. So it actually affects people in all sorts of ways. It's not a problem, perceived to be a problem, however, in our society for one simple reason, and that is we have population renewal in this country. It's just about 2%. You need 2% good birth rate to get population renewal over time. Population renewal matters enormously because the minute your population starts to decrease, your economic, your ability to generate finance and resources and things in the country, to have people who work, to sustain the older people and things like this, starts to drop immediately. So having a population renewal is very, very important. Where that's not happening, such as in Japan and Singapore and Korea and countries like this, they're actually panicking about it. And it's the major topic of discussion among their politicians. What do they do about it? It's okay in this country because we accept children outside marriage. In those countries, it's unacceptable to have children outside marriage. It's because we're a liberal democracy that allows that thinking. And the second thing is 1 in 4 children are born to immigrant mothers in United Kingdom. I read in the Evening Standard it's 6 out of 7 in London. But if we don't have the levels of immigration that we actually have enjoyed over the past decades and things, we actually won't get that same population renewal, which is interesting because actually one of the key things the country wants is population renewal. And that's very pertinent to the general zeitgeist of today, what people are thinking in society. So society is changing, but is the church? Well, the answer is not really. It's a church of the married. Under half the people are married in society, but 60%, the majority in the church are married adults. Single people are 40% in society, and just under 1 in 3 in the church. Now, you might not think those are big differences, but when you multiply, get 8% of 42.8 million people, that's a very large number. You're talking about millions of people who, if average cross-section of society came to church, are choosing not to come to church. And those are mostly single people choosing not to come to church, and especially single men on average. And the married people choosing to come to church. Now, there's all sorts of reasons we've discovered why that is the case, but I want to show you a little graph of what it looks like from a vicar's position, a church leader's position. So they look out at the church. This is a data for sort of what they see over a year. Out of every 15 people, they see 9 people who are married, 1 who is cohabiting, 3 people who are single, never married, 1 divorced, and 1 widowed. And that's a typical congregation that they see. So, of course, most churches, and I'm excluding present company, most churches, of course, cater to the majority. Naturally, that's what you do. And they cater for married people. But the church is different as an organisation to most organisations. And if it was simply about married people having children and replicating itself, it would look like just any other social organisation in society. In fact, what Jesus tried to instigate was actually a new community, a community in which everyone would feel welcome, whatever their marital status, whatever their background, whatever their anything really, status in society. And then so it was all about spiritual heirs, nothing about biological heirs. And therefore, I'm actually passionate that single people are one of the most visible signs that there's something different about the church than any other organisation. When they are flourishing, when they're in community with other people, and when they're just loving being there. The church is supposed to be a forerunner of the kingdom of God. So of course we want people to flourish. But it's difficult because there's very little teaching about how to behave as a single person, how to think about it as a single person. In fact, I spent my life with people saying, is there something wrong? Why are you not married? Have you met anyone recently? You know, as if it was absolutely essential I was, and I was letting the side down if I wasn't. In Jesus' time, by the way, there was a law called the Lex Julia, which said everyone should be married. It was a Roman law that said everyone should be married. You were fined if you weren't married. Even if you were widowed or divorced, you had to marry within a certain period, 2 to 3 years actually. Otherwise you were fined heavily. And being fined heavily in that culture was very serious, because of course it meant that you couldn't really support yourself. You went into some form of service or slavery in order to pay the fine. And but in many churches, not this one I suspect, but many churches it's difficult even to meet other single Christians because of the domination of married people. And in particular, and inside a church situation, there's no dating culture, which Jackie will talk about. This is data from that survey. These are people actively looking for somebody to go on a date, and 1 in 3 hadn't been on a date for many years, even though they were actively looking. I have a lovely friend who said she became a Christian, and she'd enjoyed many male friends before and going out with them, and then she never got invited out again. And 1 in 5 hadn't had a date for at least a year, and just over 1 in 3 have been on a few dates in the last year. That's not serious dating. Only 1 in 20 actually go on more dates than that. So they don't appear, from what they say, this group of 3,000 Christians to be flourishing in their singleness at all. That's why we're doing a campaign about a single-friendly church. We have a website to support that, and we're actually looking for a campaign organizer at the moment, if you know of anybody who's interested in a campaigner to do that. Now, some churches are fantastic for single people, and we want them to pass on what makes them fantastic and what they do successfully to other people. And we're going to ask you that question to discuss afterwards. But we asked the same question of these 3,000 people, and this is what they said about what makes a single-friendly church. There's no distinction based on marital status in any area of church life, whether it's leadership. We had people saying they weren't allowed to be youth group leaders because they were single. And the church council said to them, I mean, what kind of signal would that make to our young people if we appointed a single person? And, you know, you sort of pause in disbelief and you think about Jesus, St. Paul, the Pope, anybody really, in most positions of leadership. Home group leads programmed activities. Often, you know, activities in many, many churches are programmed for families. Cost of events. Often families get a discount. Single people pay disproportionately more when actually they're, you know, it's well established. Their financial state tends to be much lower. Sermon illustrations tend to be too often family. Social events. What do you do about today? Mother's Day and Father's Day. Used to be Mothering Sunday, going to Mother Church, but of course it's really what we mostly have now in most places are the American Mother's Day and Father's Day. So all of these things matter to people. The second is welcome and including. people said they loved being part of their churches, that they felt part of the community, but they were never invited to anybody's houses. You know, I see some nodding heads. All right, it's very common apparently. So they didn't feel included in the same sort of way, and this inclusion matters into any sort of community you belong to, because actually not only is it about good social contacts, which increases mental well-being in all sorts of ways, but it's also physical and physiological. When you're with people that you really relax with, your physiology changes and your immune system increases. And then people want and hear things about talks that actually are relevant to them and not to living a set, stable, family-based life. You know, how do you make decisions about where to live or what to do if you've got no roots yet as a single person? So there are lots of different kinds of questions that get raised. So that's the sort of very broad overview of the kinds of things that we're looking at. On the website, we have lots of advice for church leaders of when people come and ask them questions, and also for single people of the sorts of questions they're asking. And if you see anything and think of anything that you'd like to get answered, do just drop it on a bit of paper and hand it to me later on.
So what sort of words come to you when you think about online dating? Sorry, I was trying to... are there any, what sort of good words and what sort of not so good words come into your head when you hear the term online dating? Or indeed dating in general, but particularly we're going to look at online dating.
Dating game.
Dating game? Yes?
Safe.
Safe or not, yes.
I imagine it's safe because you do it from the distance of a computer initially, and
yeah, a lot of people would say it was unsafe actually, but I'm glad you think it's safe. So yes, so safety is a very big issue. So we're going to look a little bit about the myths and benefits and the risks and the rewards. So how do I then go to the next? Right, I'll just go next. Right. So here are some words that I've heard. Wonderful, safe. For some people for whom it's worked, it's like God has worked through online dating. Other people talk about swipe right. People talk about scammers. People say full of losers. So people have very different experiences which tend to pop up depending on their experience. And of course there are some people who are extremely knowledgeable about the subject and some people who literally put their toe in the water and then put it straight out. So here are some facts. About 27% of new relationships begin online in the UK. So out of all the relationships that start, 27 originate online. That figure is probably out of date. It's probably going up. I know, talking to people who are in their teens and early 20s, it's almost become, I mean, I don't want to generalise too much, but it's almost become the first port of call. You're probably not interested in the size of the market. It's 225 million, again, it's quite a lot. And about 15% of all adults have used online dating. And nowadays, you know, I've been in it for 16 years. Most people are accessing from this size of phone. And it's particularly increasing now through what we call dating apps, things like Tinder, Bumble, increasing among the young, and I'm talking 16 to 24. But it's also increasing for those over 55. So it's become quite a complex and interesting industry with a lot going on. So how do people meet? And I find this graph particularly interesting. I have to say it is the US, so it's not, I'm sure the UK is different. But I mean, what you find here is, of course, friends increasingly is very, very important. People having to meet through meeting through friends. Church is, I'm afraid, very low indeed. People are not meeting through church. And things like co-workers, college, neighbours at school is all pretty low nowadays. The only thing that, of course, has dramatically, the only graph that has gone dramatically up is people meeting online. So you've got here through friends, in a bar or restaurant, and online. And really the online is just growing hugely, continuing to grow. And I mean, I've met sort of people who run nightclubs, and they say, you know, the business is dying because fewer people are going to nightclubs to meet people. So whatever we feel about it, it's a hugely important change. It's a little bit about Christian Connection for those of you who have questions. We have about 3,000 new joiners every month. We have about 1.8 million interactions, which is people contacting each other, and about 350,000 visitors. So we're just a small niche site if you compare us to people like Match.com or The Guardian, whatever. But actually, even with quite a small niche, it's a very, very busy site. So people hope that they're going to, people go into it because they hear about the amazing success stories of friends, people they know who've met online. But a Christian will have the question, can God work through online dating? And those who are afraid will say, well, I'm not sure God can work through online dating. And people are afraid of meeting strange people online. I sometimes have, you know, people write in and say, it's not biblical to meet online. Well, obviously not. But, you know, how did people meet, you know, in biblical times? Well, I think that one of the major ways is they met near wells. But we don't, apart from water coolers, we don't really have those options. But I think we encountered a lot of opposition in the early years to online dating. I really think that has changed dramatically as more and more church leaders are marrying people. They know people who've met online. But there's still work to be done. And it would be great if churches could understand more about online dating and be more supportive about it. Why does it work, particularly for niches and particularly for Christians? The church, as we know, there are very limited opportunities. A lot of churches just don't have that many single people. A lot of, as it says there, a lot of single people don't actually go to church, even if they are Christian, because they just feel it's not for them. Because of what David said about the pattern of so many churches. But are people going to find other Christians at work, study, on holiday or gym? Have you ever met, has anybody met a Christian in a gym or at work? Well, if you work for a Christian organisation, yes, maybe, but it doesn't happen very much. And of course the other thing is, if people are going to different churches, they're not meeting each other. So something like a dating site brings together the variety of traditions. It creates a climate of respect for Christians. Sorry about this, so you. So, you know, some websites, they do have Christians on there, but people feel that their faith isn't understood, it isn't respected. We try to provide support as to the Christian community. And everybody's kind of in the same boat, looking for a relationship online. So we try to create a sense of community and a sense of support. Now, it's very important to emphasize the fact that not all Christian dating sites are the same. If you have heard, you might have heard of Christian Connection. Christian Mingle is a very big American site. Faith Dating is a small UK site. Christian Cafe is also American. And then there's the sites that don't describe themselves as Christian. eHarmony was founded by a Christian person, so it has quite a lot of Christians on it. Match.com has a sort of section for Christians. I put The Guardian up there. I'm not quite sure what The Guardian do, but I doubt they have, but I'm sure they probably have quite a number. And then there's something called white label dating. Does anybody know what white label is? Well, it's something that if you're ever thinking about doing this, you need to be aware of. Tell me, is this a Christian site? Looks Christian, but is it? Is this a Christian site? And the answer is neither of them are. There are lots of sites that pop up online that if you type in something like Christian dating, and actually they've just been set up, they've got a mass site and they just put different frontages on it. So you could join that site and you could meet lots of atheists, and you could meet people who joined from a lads mag or a single parent site, all sorts. But they don't match them up properly. So it's just something you need to be careful about and say, is this really what it purports to be? You know, I've known these sort of sites being run by people who also run adult sites. So, you know, you just have to be a bit careful and not just go for the first site you see. So there's a whole range here. Obviously, a lot of people love to join free sites. Free sites can be very good, but there's no credit cards involved, so you don't know, anybody could join, say anything about themselves. Very difficult to know if they're genuine. So there is that issue. We're going to talk a little bit about apps in one of the next slides. Some of us together founded something called the Online Dating Association. There's a logo there. And those are sites, Christian Connection is one, Matchy, Harmony, Guardian are all now members, where we try to adhere to certain standards of not ripping people off, not lying, and generally treating people as proper customers. Not all sites do that, unfortunately. I would always say, if you're checking out, look at the terms and conditions, find out where the site's based, look at proper reputation reviews and recommendations. You've probably seen there are an awful lot of review and recommendation sites that are nothing of the kind. They are simply paid for by particular sites, and it's all done for money, but they're not genuine. So you need to ask your friends, you need to pluck up the courage and say, is this okay? You also, like any contract, you need to look at the cancellation policy and make sure that you can actually cancel. Part of it is knowing where you can cancel, because some sites just won't show you how to cancel. So these are things you just need to be a bit careful of. About 4 or 5 years ago, Tinder started, and that was a big game changer for the dating world. There are 50 million people. Does anybody not know what Tinder is, by the way? Okay, you do. Yes, 50 million people on Tinder, of which 79% are what we call millennials, 35 and under. More than half of that number is under 24. Only 54% are actually single, apparently. More men than women, and many are also on paying dating sites as well. I find this last statistic rather fascinating. 1 billion people swipe. For every 1 billion swipes, there are 12 million matches. So that's when you swipe and the other person swipes, and you're a match. So I don't know, my maths isn't great, but that is not a high, that is a tiny proportion of people who actually get to match. But having said that, Tinder has been a massive game changer, but at the same time, some statistics on sexually transmitted diseases and sexual assault have also gone up quite a lot since they were founded. General safety issues, something people do ask about. The biggest problem we encounter is fraud, not the personal safety thing. It is really about people exploiting vulnerable people on the site, getting into their confidence and ripping them off for a large amount of money. People very rarely read the safety rules about meeting in a public place, making sure if you're travelling that you stay somewhere safe, that you keep in touch with friends. There are also blackmails and young people who use mobile apps are often extremely confident about what they're doing and perhaps aren't as cautious as people who are a bit older. As far as how you get going, I think the important thing, and the mistake that most people make, is they're not intentional enough. People need to want to do it, put in the time and energy, and cope with the fact that you have to send out a lot of emails or swipe rights to actually get the response. It takes courage, it takes patience, it takes stickability to go ahead with it. And the good thing about it is you can be proactive. There are many people, especially female Christians, who go on the site, put a profile up, and then sit back and wait for somebody to contact them. It doesn't work, especially when in the Christian world more people, there are more women than men. Although there are more women on Christian Connection than women, there are a lot more men online than in churches. And more men are more proactive and positive and believe they will meet their partner online, and they reply more than women. So that's a sort of interesting difference between men and women. How are we doing for time? No? Okay, well, we're all right. Okay. So a few things. People often say, I want to join a really big site with lots and lots of people. If you had to choose between 1,000 types of jam, it wouldn't be easy to make a choice. Most people are happier if they only have to choose between, 3 or 4 varieties. So too much choice can be a bad thing. So the important thing is to limit yourself as you go. Don't go through endless profiles. Limit the session online and just commit to contacting regularly 1 or 2 people as you go. Look for similar interests and values, and don't focus too much on location. People tend to want to meet somebody who's within 5 miles, and the right person may be a lot further away. There's also ways of getting involved in the community, on discussion forums, which we have, finding out about people, about their opinions, how they express themselves, and how they disagree. There are 2 subjects we ban on Christian Connection. One is Darwin, evolution, and the other is sexuality, LGBT, because it just creates so much. So we just don't let people talk about it. But there are plenty of things that people have fantastic conversations about. So with a photo, the photo is the big thing, making sure that you have a good photo, a friendly photo, an accessible photo, a photo that your friends like, that is up to date, that is not 10 years old or even 5 years old, and expresses your personality and who you are. Some people find that extremely difficult to do, but it is a key part of the process. And the important thing is to remember that dating happens in real life, not online. So the best thing is to meet somebody as soon as you've got to know them just a little bit online. What people do is overinvest in a relationship online, and they go on for weeks and months, and then when they finally meet, they say, this is not the person I thought he or she was. So the best thing is, once there's a little bit of interest, to meet quickly on a short and relaxed date, rather than creating something in your mind that isn't there. Safety stuff, which I won't go into too much, but people there's a lot of checks you can do before you meet somebody, and just making sure that this person really is who they say they are. So I've given you some of the tips, some of the issues, but I want to say that online dating really does work. I was actually at an event a couple of nights ago, met a very sort of serious Christian couple, told them what I did, and they went, oh, our daughter's just met somebody, and it just happened very quickly. It's absolutely wonderful. So there are some fantastic stories of people who've met, who never believed that they would meet, and it's happening all the time. So it's not easy. Online dating is not easy. There are a lot of challenges, but for those for whom, there are amazing and wonderful stories, and people getting together across denominations as well. You know, it's not all, well, I'm an Anglo-Catholic, I'm not going to talk to an evangelical. People actually do get together across what we consider the divides, and some great relationships have come through.